yeah, maybe we can start, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background. And, you do a lot of things. You're a therapist, you've made some films, you've written some
Right.
books, but, maybe at a high level, tell me about kind of your background and how you got into this work, and, why you're passionate about these things.
Actually, there's so many
Yeah.
ways I could go with that, but I'll tell you
Yeah.
the freshest one. I was in Peru in January, and I was doing thing out in the jungle there, and I was working with ayahuasca, and I got this. I've been in therapy and shit like that for 30 something years, but I got this really simple download on the medicine, which said your problem is that you were born and raised in a family where your parents really loved you and really took care of you. So it's really hard to identify what's traumatic about that. I may have said this in the film even.
You did.
Actually.
Yeah.
But the problem was that they didn't want you. And that pretty much describes my background. I think being born just different to my family. My family are good people in with their own struggles and what have you. But very, very kind of relative to my values and who I am. Certainly, my parents very straight, very conventional, quite right-wing people, and I think every time they had a very strong projection onto me of the kid they wanted. I feel kind of compassionate and a bit sorry for them that they got me. Because I was so far from the dream, and at the same time I feel kind of compassionate and proud of myself that I didn't really succumb to the pressure of being who they wanted me to be. So I managed somehow to escape that. But every time I didn't fit into the model of who they wanted, they kind of medicated me or sent me to psychiatrists or whatever, which again, at this stage and age of my life, I can be less pissed off and bitter about, and actually feel quite touched by. It's like, okay, they were just being parents. They were just trying to, do what they thought was right in the time. So I think I went down a very rebellious path just to maintain some kind of integrity, and was always, quite creative or artistic, really, really, really not academic. But like a lot of people who go to art school or do music or whatever, I dabbled in film early on as well. I found it very hard to make any kind of income, and then I discovered therapy, and to me it's just another art form. I don't see it as an intellectual or an academic thing. I think it's a very creative way of being, so I kind of took to it quite quickly. I've been doing that for nearly 30 years now, but with a background in arts and chaos.
Amazing. Yeah. Was there like in your childhood, like, was there like where you were like kind of rebellious from like the get-go and were kind of just forging your own path, or was there like a point in time where, I don't know whether it was earlier or later, where you kind of had to become your own person and kind of reject the upbringing and kind of found yourself?
No, I think it was from day one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a problem child.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I think a lot of people resonate with that. Yeah. Including myself.
Yeah. As a dad, I always rejected terms like, and they go, oh, the terrible twos. When those kids hit 2, it's going to be really well, only if you put that onto them. I never found that with my kids. I thought it was an amazing time, but if if you try and put people in boxes, some people are okay with that, and some people have a problem with that. I don't really have a judgment. Some people just want to fit in. I think we probably all want to fit in, but I guess I knew I didn't or couldn't, and there's part of me. I think I've always recognized that there's part of me that if I could have just got a job and gone and worked for a bank, maybe I would have done, but that was never an option. And when I left school, I remember they said to me, well, you're unemployable. And that felt kind of a bit, well, I didn't feel like a positive. I wasn't too hung up on it, but yeah, it didn't feel like an endorsement. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s, I was like, oh, yeah, they were right.
Mm.
They did me a favor. It did a lot of
Yeah.
people a favor because I never wasted anyone's time, filling out job applications or going for job interviews. And I'm just one of those people that's not really employable. I'm not an employee.
Yeah.
I've always worked for myself, and I
Mhm.
think that's better for everyone. And it's helpful. It's helpful to know what kind of person you are, I suppose. If you're an employee and you're trying to be freelance, it's probably not going to work. And if you're one of the people who's not so good at working for someone else, then it's not going to work out too well if you try and hold down a job in some kind of corporation. So
Yeah. That's. I think a lot of people need to do that analysis. It's true. It's very true. And yeah, I'm also curious. Like you kind of touched on it a little bit, but and you mentioned it in your film Mayday. But like the idea of our society maybe doesn't do a great job at um transitioning children to adults, and there are a lot of there are a lot of children that are, they're maybe 40, 50, 60, 70, that are in political positions, that are running companies, that are parents. And I, I thought that was a really interesting idea. Like I hadn't heard it articulated before, but I knew exactly what you're talking about. And I think it's a very poignant point. And I'm curious, like how, what is, whether it's the family unit or the way that our societies are kind of structured, like what are we missing in order to, actually help children graduate to adulthood? Like, what are we not doing? And why does this continually why are we perpetuating this? Like, is it, I'm just curious, like, what we're doing wrong and how we can, I guess, better help children become adults.
yeah, I don't know. I'm one of those shrinks who's I'm really, really, really good. Like really good at knowing what the problem is. I'm
Yeah.
really shit at knowing what the answer is. So you come and see me for therapy, and I can tell you what the issue is immediately, and then they go, "So what do we do?" It's like, I don't fucking know. Um, I mean, I'm not an anthropologist, so other people would be able to answer that. It's just something I observe is missing. It was missing in me. I mean,
Yeah.
I hit 18 and I thought I was going to wake up on my 18th birthday and something would have
Yeah.
changed, and it didn't. And then I hit 20. I thought, well, maybe it'll be on my 21st. That didn't work. It was 30, 40. I think I was in my 50s. I don't know what's different now. I think I heard on a podcast recently that I was listening to, they were talking about, I think they used the term arrested adolescence, or no, delayed adolescence. It was on Modern Wisdom, that guy was
Yeah.
talking about delayed adolescence and how people are staying. Maybe there's a good side to this as well. 100 years ago, when you're 30, you're deep into middle age, and you look at photos from people around about the First World War, and those kids, those children going off to the war look like men. They look like adults, and they're like 19, 20 years old. Now I think, you know, what do I hear? What did I hear? 60 is the new 40. I hope so, because I'm turning 60 this year. I think maybe we're living longer. Life is easier. Life isn't such a struggle. I think struggle is a really important thing in learning how to find. It's where you meet yourself, right? And I'm not
Yeah.
saying there aren't struggle. There's really, really, really massive struggles that people face, but in kind of middle class Western culture, the struggle is not life and death like it might have been before. The struggle is, can I limit myself to just 8 hours on my phone or on TikTok
Yeah.
or something? So I think we're in a strange time that doesn't test us perhaps in the ways that we used to be tested. And for me, I don't know. Ritualized hardship orchestrated hardship has helped me. I
Yeah.
can't really explain it in a ABC formula, but
Sure. Yeah.
going out into the woods, sitting on my own for days without food or a phone or books or anything, and just sitting and being and meeting myself helped a lot. Plant medicine helped. Years of therapy helped. Was there a specific moment? And would that have even worked when I was 18? No. There's lots of
Yeah.
rituals you can read about, where traditionally, the generally it was gender based. The men would take the pubescent boys out somewhere and put them through some kind of challenge, and the women would take the girls out same kind of age. But I'm not advocating we should do it, or they wouldn't hurt. Wouldn't hurt.
What kind of, or how did you get introduced to some of this ritualized hardship? Like, are you talking about the stuff that you are participating in and leading in your groups, or are there other things that you kind of stumbled upon when you were 18, where you said, like, fuck it, I'm just going to go camp for 4 days in the wilderness with no, did you
No,
kind
I
of
wasn't.
seek it
I
out,
wasn't
or?
doing anything like that when I was 18. I was just taking as many drugs and fucking around and playing rock and roll, and there was no rite of passage in that. And I think for me the rite of passage was probably, I think I was 42 and I got divorced. I think it's an interesting thing. A lot of the retreats that I run now are they're almost like orchestrated breakdowns, because I think I saw a meme the other day. People dismiss memes. I think there's some wisdom in some of them. It said, organize a break or life will organize one for you. And I think that's true of this thing we call breakdown. You can have a breakdown or you can have a breakthrough. Breakdown, by my definition, would be something that seems to happen to you, which disorganizes your life. It can be you get fired from a job, or you get sick, or you have a divorce, or whatever. So that crisis was something that really shook me up and made me go much deeper. Or, like I say, on some of the retreats that we do, we take people out and we leave them in the woods, and so it's an emergency, it's a crisis. But because you know that you've chosen it and that it's going to end on Friday, it's not as catastrophic as if you're out in the woods and you get lost. That's a different thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Metaphorically or literally. So for me, getting lost in the middle of my life was probably the real rite of passage. And then I started to look at, okay, I'm here. How do I sculpt this complete mess that I've created? How do I sculpt this? How do I turn this into something of value? And I'm saying this with hindsight. I don't know that it was especially conscious at the time. This is looking back. I think I was pulled towards some of these ritualized things. Like, I read about the tradition of Native American vision quest, and that intrigued me. And I'd known about plant medicine. I'd messed around very irresponsibly as a kid and had a good time. And an important learning time with psychedelics, but I'd not used them in a really exploratory way, in the way that I did when I hit my 50s. I started, I say started, it's not something I've done a lot of. It's still pretty scary terrain for me, but that's where you're going to meet yourself.
How did you get introduced to plant medicine? And if you don't mind me asking, like, is it ayahuasca? Is it ibogaine? Like, is there a particular sort of plant medicine that you think is maybe the most beneficial, or that you've dealt with?
Yeah.
And how did you get
Yeah,
introduced to it?
I had a meeting with the BBC in London with a guy there who was interested in me doing a podcast, but he's like, yeah, it's problematic though, because if you Google your name, it just comes up with ayahuasca. I was like, I learned about ayahuasca on the fucking BBC, and now you're telling me you don't want to work with me because I've taken ayahuasca. So there was a really good documentary series about 20 years ago where a guy went off and tried all sorts of, actually it was iboga, ibogaine. Was the first one that I saw, and that really intrigued me. I had known about ayahuasca before that, but watching someone go through these different things, I think it sparked something. Well, it really scared me. It really, really scared me, and that's usually something I move towards. And unless it's toxic or dangerous, those things don't scare me. They just repulse me. If it scares me in a kind of excited way, that's a warning sign for me, because I'll probably do it sooner or later. So I think the first thing I did was ayahuasca, and then I did a boga, and I've tried a few other things like 5-MeO DMT, probably some other things I can't remember, but yeah, in there, in a ritualized way. I was listening to, I think it was Michael Pollan who did How to Change Your Mind. Is one of those guys, was saying, as long as there's a ceremony or a ritual, you rarely have a problem. It's when these things are used indiscriminately, irresponsibly, that, even alcohol, you can do a toast. It's not the same as getting shit-faced in a bar. So I think where there's respect, and a space that's held well, then for some people, it can be a useful way. And for me, it was, I've been in therapy for 20 something years at that point, and I was just hitting the same wall and realizing there were aspects of myself that I couldn't access, that
And
took me down that road.
like I think, yeah, I'd like to linger on this a little bit, because I think, unfortunately, I mean, I think it depends on the circle that you're in, but when the general public hears, ayahuasca, I don't know, there's like this kind of caricature that it's like, oh, people trying to find themselves in the jungle or whatever. But like, I think, I mean, the last person I had on this podcast is also heavily involved in plant medicine and ayahuasca and retreats for veterans, and it's, over the last several years, I mean, it's gained enough attention in scientific research that it's definitely becoming legitimized and more mainstream. But I think I'd love to spend just a little bit of time, hearing you articulate, like, what exactly happens when you take these plant medicines in a ritualized way, and psychologically, how is it benefiting you? Is it allowing you, like, what is like the secret sauce of the plant medicine? Is it allowing you to, you know um face things that you couldn't face before, or, like, how exactly is it helping people? Because it seems like it's helped a tremendous amount of people, and I'm kind of just curious, like, how it works in the therapeutic sense.
I mean, first off, just to say, I think it's fantastic that people are using with veterans.
Yeah.
That's really, really important work. The flip side of that is, as you kind of allude to, it's become fashionable, and I think that's really, really dangerous. It's not something I would recommend anyone really goes to unless they have done some research, know what they're getting into, and really feel called to do, because you're really defragging your psyche. And I'd done a lot of work on myself by the time I went there. It's not to say you need to have done that, but I don't know, the older I get, the more I'm not young and reckless anymore, so the more cautious I get, in a way. I'm aware of the odds of playing Russian roulette with your own psyche. As to how it works, I don't know. I can only talk about my own personal experience and maybe 200 or 300 people that I've worked with,
Yeah.
through that process. I think it's a truth serum. If you do therapy with me, or if I go to therapy, which I do still, you have to be really, really, really self-aware, not to just swerve things in the most subtle way. If things are getting too painful or too difficult, I'll notice that I'm just adjusting my breathing to inhibit a certain emotion so that things don't get too much, so I don't cry in front of my therapist. I mean, I do that, but there's still those old defense mechanisms are in place. So I think we all have the potential to run rings around our therapist, and you can't do that with plant medicine. It just goes straight to the heart of the matter. And that's, I think some people can have problems with that, because if then you're resistant to that, and then you go, oh shit, I don't like this experience. Well, too late. you're in too deep. But I think it's an amazing, particularly ayahuasca and iboga. They're very, very good shadow medicines. They kind of take you to a deeper part of yourself, like it or not, who you really are. And I think if you go into it with reverence and respect for what you're doing for yourself and the medicine, then the chances are you will be received with respect. If you go in, I remember the first time I went, I was really scared. I mean, I'm always scared when I do these things. But the first time, and I said to the guy who was running the thing, do people have a bad time on this? And he said, well, only if they kind of come as tourists. If you go as a tourist, you're probably going to get your ass handed to you. It has an intelligence. These medicines have an intelligence, and they know what you're there for, whether you're there, like I say, with a bit of humility. Humility goes a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And you mentioned the shadow. I mean, that's a term that I personally am a little bit of like a psychology nerd, so I'm familiar with it. But a lot of people, it's kind of come up on, it's also gained some popularity. But I think a lot of people don't really know what that means. And I know, in your bio, you're very into shadow work, or at least that's what I read. But I'd love to maybe demystify, what the shadow is and why it's, how people in therapy or just in their normal lives can kind of come into contact with the shadow and work with the shadow and build a relationship with it, and what the benefit of that really is.
I think probably the way most of us come in contact with the shadow part of ourselves is when we hate someone else. It's a great exercise. I can't remember who I stole it from. I didn't invent it, but you make a statement. Donald Trump is an egotistical, predatory maniac, and then you make it as a nice statement. So I am an egotistical, predatory maniac, and it's always true. That's showing a side of myself that I really reject and don't like. And I've always liked, I think when I was in my mid-20s, I discovered a guy called George Gurdjieff, who was an Armenian mystic from about 100 years ago. I just picked up a book about him in India. And one of his things that he introduced me to was the idea that we're all multiple selves. He said, there's no true self. We're all a cast of characters that are being added to daily. So, if you're on this quest to really find your true self, well, good luck, because there's a lot of you and it's going to just keep getting bigger every day. So you're never going to find that one identity. He said there's such a thing as essence. There's your essence. But true self, there's a lot of selves. There's a great quote. Someone asked Keith Richards, what's Mick Jagger like? And he said, he's an interesting bunch of guys. And I think that actually applies to everybody. We're all a bunch of different people. And then I think, again, Michael Pollan? No, it wasn't Pollan, but one of those guys, I think the guy who wrote, James Fadiman, he wrote the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. And then a year or two ago, he came out with a book that was called Symphony of Selves, which explores the same thing. And a lot of people are into IFS now, which is internal family systems, which is a kind of form of therapy. So I think this idea there's a lot of us is growing. And in the Fadiman book, which I didn't read because I actually felt I knew a lot about it. I wasn't learning too much new, but there was something in the beginning. I think I read the first chapter or two. There was a line that I thought was really, really eloquent and well put. He said, if we accept this notion, which generally people do, that there's such a thing as multiple personality disorder, there must therefore be such a thing as multiple personality order, because you can't have a disorder without an order. So I thought that was well put. And so you could say the shadow is the cast. If you got this cast of 100 characters, or 1,000 or 1,000,000 characters or whatever, they are the characters that you reject. You go, oh, I don't like that one. Too much. That one's too dangerous. That one's too violent. That one's too selfish. That one's too greedy. That one's too brilliant. That one's too clever. That one's too charismatic. Or, that's the thing that most people who work with the shadow will agree on is not that difficult to persuade someone what an asshole they can be on a bad day. Really, really hard to persuade people how brilliant they are. And so your shadow is any part of you you can't accept and you reject. And I think that the misconception is that it's just, bad stuff, dark stuff. It's not. It's the light stuff as well. And it's something I really like about America. Be interested on your thoughts on this. If you have the same shadow, because something you guys have in America that we don't have here, which is you're allowed to succeed and you're allowed to be proud of your success. In England, that's a very, very vulgar thing. And if you're successful, you have to play it down. America, I think it's part of the American dream that you can be successful, but it's kind of seen as a little bit kind of gauche and vulgar and crass if you show off your success. And when I was a kid, one of the worst things you could be accused of was boasting. And it's something I think the British find a little bit repulsive about American culture. Like, oh my God, but they're so brash, because you're actually able to celebrate when you succeed. So there's definitely a Northern European shadow, which will deny our greatness. What's the thing that Britain's most proud of? Dunkirk.
Yeah.
It's called the Dunkirk spirit. Yeah, we ran away really well.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. There's definitely in the United States a celebration of success, and it can manifest in boastful ways, but it's also like the value proposition of the United States in many ways. It's like, this is why people come here. I mean, I live in New York, and New York is like the most, diverse place that I've ever been. There's lots of people speaking different languages, and everybody has come here, for many different reasons, but to kind of simplify, like, because they see opportunity and they want to pursue opportunity. And it doesn't feel like there's like a cap, like to some people, maybe. A lot of people, immigrants that have literally nothing, like, or they're pursuing, the idea that there's no real kind of ceiling. So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's interesting to think about, though. Tell me a little bit about how you got involved in group therapy and men's groups. I read somewhere that you have like the longest. You've been running the longest men's group or group therapy in the UK. I mean, tell me a little bit about, because as somebody that doesn't really know anything about group therapy, and I think a lot of people probably don't who aren't in therapy, like, how did you get involved in this? What inspired you, or what was the impetus to conduct a group, a group therapy? And then also, what are the benefits, the distinct benefits of group therapy that are different than, individual therapy?
I don't think I have the longest running group. I'm told I have one of the biggest men's group, if not the biggest men's group practices, which sounds like an amazing thing until you realize that's 35 people. It's nothing, and that it's more of a testament to how little of this work is going on, rather than what an amazing achievement that is. I mean, I've got 4. It's actually dropped over the last few years as my energy is kind of dropped a bit. So I've got 4 groups of 8 or 9 or 10 people. So 35, 40 people that meet every other week. I mean, when did I start? That's an interesting one. You see a lot of stuff that I think is true, which supports the idea that, as therapists, we're working from our own wounds. And so why am I instinctively good at running groups? Because I think I was trying to hold my family of origin together. And to me, that's probably what does group therapy even mean? One definition would be, well, our position in any group is defined by our family of origin. The place you had within your home as a kid, the status you had, the position you took, will be reflected in any group, whether it's work, social, your own family you create, will be an echo of where you started out. Now, if that wasn't too good, then a therapy group is a great place to go and explore that position and try something different out in a very kind of conscious, overt way. So that's always part of how I brief people when they're joining a group. I would say my group work training happened, in recording studios and rehearsal studios and the back of vans driving up and down Britain in a rock and roll band, because that's a really good place to learn group dynamics and about egos. And I learned a lot from that. I mean, that's the thing I love about this stage of my life, is everything I ever did I recognize the value of it. Nothing is really as much of a failure as it seemed when I was younger. So being in a rock and roll band was a great training that I had no idea I was in training, or that it would be of value later. I actually started running therapeutic groups, 29 years ago, I think. And I started out working with male perpetrators of domestic violence, and did that for a few years, and kind of got into it because I didn't like men very much. And I wanted to go and help the problem that was men. And then as I began to work with them and got beyond the kind of the front, the mask, then I got into some of the vulnerability and the gentleness that was behind the hurt and the rage and the violence and the toxicity. I kind of fell in love with them. And I didn't plan it. And my oldest private group is 24 years old this year. That wasn't a plan. I never knew that was going to happen, And what's therapeutic about it? Like I say, you can change the dynamic, but I don't know. We even occasionally someone say, "Are we doing therapy here?" I don't know. It's therapeutic. Is it therapy? I don't know. There's no technique. There's no specific approach. We sit around in a circle. And what I notice with retreats is you can take a bunch of complete strangers and you sit them around a fire, and it's like something remembers. They remember this experience. Oh yeah, my ancestors did this. I'm familiar with this. I know this. I can be here. So there's something about a circle that works for people. We just, that's what we do. We sit in a circle. It wouldn't work if you did it in a line. I remember I went to when I met my wife, I went to Paris to do a talk, and they had the room lined up with a desk that I was supposed to sit behind and rows of chairs. And I was like, I'm not sitting behind a desk. And can we put they were like, oh shit, are you sure? These people, this is Paris. They're expecting a lecture. I was like, well, okay, but that's not what I do. I'm here to talk with people.
Yeah.
And I said, can you put the chairs in a circle? And they were like, no, that's not happening. So we did it in rows, but that always feels a bit hierarchical and distanced, and the circle is, everyone's equal, right?
Yeah. And what is with group therapy, like what is the intention? I mean, obviously people are trying to, when you do individual therapy, you're trying to become a more authentic version of yourself. You're trying to understand why you make decisions. You're trying to understand how your family has shaped your behavior and all of that. When you hold a men's group or just a group, what exactly are people coming for that's different than maybe an individual kind of therapy session?
Yeah, I guess they're looking for a support system. They're looking for community. And again, in England, there's quite defined rules that you probably, unless you stop and think about it, don't even know that you're following. But the rules are, you go to the pub, you have a drink, and you talk about football. And you shouldn't really talk about anything else. Certainly not emotion. I remember one of the guys who started 24 years ago, I said, so why do you come? And he's like, because if I go to the pub and my friend says, how are you doing? And I go, oh, a bit shit, not getting on with the wife or something. They'll say, oh, have a pint. That's the general response.
Yeah.
So we're breaking the rules by creating an environment where you can be emotional, you can talk about anything. There's a social aspect to it, but I guess it's just a bit more three-dimensional and a bit more real. We're not confined by these kind of, the etiquette of societal norms or what our families, I mean, it's interesting because we'll get in very, very deep and get in some really, personal naked truths, and then we have a tea break and they're talking about football.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Haven't got over that one yet. Haven't found a way past that. But it's not wrong, I don't mind
Yeah.
that. I'm not very good at chatting shit about football. I don't like
Yeah.
football, but it's nice to expand the palette a bit, have a broader menu.
This is a pretty broad question, but answer it however you want. Like, what is the group setting, the setting of group therapy taught you, and what has surprised you about it compared to maybe just one-on-one individual therapy?
You mentioned Tim Hetherington. He made a film that you may have seen called Restrepo.
Yeah.
With Sebastian Junger, and I met with Sebastian when I was in New York last time, and a guy called Brandon O'Byrne who was in Restrepo. He was one of the troops in Restrepo, and I think it's in the book. And he also said it to me in person. There are people here that I don't even like. Maybe I even hate them on a bad day, but I die for them. And I think there's something. All right, we're not under threat here. We're not under attack. There is no threat for us. But there's something about that kind of brotherhood that you can create where, in a world that more and more people, I think, are feeling isolated and separate, and a world that's perhaps getting more and more divided, just having that knowledge that there's a group of people who've got your back and that you can reach out to. That's a very psychologically healthy thing, I think. So perhaps it's, therapy in itself, and these groups, rare though they are, is perhaps it's an answer to the collapse of community. It's easy to romanticize community. I'm sure people lived in community and fucking hated each other.
Yeah.
But we don't have it in the way that we used to. Certainly not in an urban environment. There's very little community. I've lived in this neighborhood for 16 years. I don't really know anyone. So there's some familiar faces, but there's not that thing that when I was a kid I knew as community, where you knew everyone, and then people left their doors open and helped each other out. So I think we're creating little constructed communities.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I was taken back most by when I watched Mayday, the film that you and Mai created. Was it does seem, especially with everything going on right now, it does seem like we're reaching this peak of polarization, at least in the United States. Like, there's this intense polarization where people are increasingly very vicious to one another, and everybody's sitting in a camp. Everybody has basically found a camp that they sit in, and they're everything about their the way that they represent themselves is a signal of that camp. And one of the most interesting things about the film was, in the beginning or near the beginning, there's a scene where there's this kind of, there's an exchange between two or three people where there was a fight, at the retreat. And, it seemed vicious. It's stuff that you hear, people arguing about politics, or people, somebody belittling each other. And I was like, wow, I was really curious. I was like, damn, how are they going to handle this? How is Jerry going to handle this? And how is the group going to, is this going to be a fracture throughout the retreat, or are people going to heal from this? Personally, I was like, I don't know how they can go back. But one of the most incredible things was it resolved itself, and it grew. The relationship between these people grew, and it gave me a lot of hope, because it's these people found humanity in people that are different than them, and in people that they disagree with. All these people have very different experiences. There are probably lots of things that they disagree about, and there are probably a million things that they could fight about. But somehow they found humanity in each other, and were able to display love, and we're able to display friendship, and we're able to care for each other. And it's that was very reassuring to me, because it's like we need so much more of that. And so I guess my question is my question is like, very broadly, I mean, what are your ideas on, restoring that humanity in a world that is so polarized? Like, how can people conduct themselves and conduct themselves with others so that we can stop hating each other and, you know, show each
Uh,
other compassion?
I mean, my first response is it's not going to happen in a hurry. Anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, it might
Yeah.
happen, but it's it's easy to get depressed when you look around. I
Yeah.
I I, I made a point in a book that I wrote. I think I was depressed by the time I wrote the book because I'd explored so much darkness. I was like, shit, this is I've got to give people a happy ending here. um, and one of the observations I made was, even though it feels overwhelming and bleak, change happens. It's just it doesn't always happen in our lifetime, right? You got to be you got to plant trees that you probably never will see, grow to maturity. So that's what this film is for. It's to try and share those experiences, share alternatives. There's a therapist I work with. I'm in a group myself, also, and he said something. I love little sound bites, and I took this one off him. He said, "Well, blame is a solution." And I thought that's great. That's really true. That's why we blame people, right? Well, it's the fucking Jews' problem, or it's the blacks' problem, or it's women's problem, or men are the problem, or whatever. The minute you blame someone, it's not your fault. So it's really, really, really tempting to blame. And I think we need to find alternatives to that. And that involves good old fashioned talking. But how the fuck we're going to do that in a world which, I was listening to Joe Rogan, I can't remember who he was talking to. And sometimes I'll hear something and go, that sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but not everything is, sadly. And he was talking to whoever the guest was about this phenomena that makes sense to me, of back to memes, how the Russians, the Chinese, the British, the Americans, probably every other government in the world release divisive memes. So they'll release a funny meme,
Yeah.
like because they get shared a lot, and whether it's like I think they were using vaccination as the example, whether it's anti-vax or pro-vax, they don't give a shit. They'll release both, because what they want is to polarize people and divide people, because what you want is your enemy to be divided. You don't want it to be united. I thought that's an interesting phenomena, that this thing we created that we thought was going to bring us together, called the internet, is turning out to be more problematic than we realized. And
Yeah.
it hasn't it has there's good things and there's bad things, but I think we're only beginning to recognize there's the shadow. The internet has a massive shadow, and so it's going to have to settle down, and maybe we need to learn how to utilize some of the technology. But we got AI on the horizon, and it's we're in very, very, very unknown terrain as a species. Usually what does bring people together? Adversity brings people. I remember when Trump got in, I was really bummed. I'm sure I wasn't alone in that. But I was talking to, I think, my editor at the time, and we were going, but it's probably going to be good for, like, Nixon was quite cool, because a lot of people really stepped up and protested against Nixon. You need something to push against. You don't want a
Yeah.
wishy-washy vanilla.
Yeah.
If someone's going to be oppressive, which they probably all are oppressive in their own way, they're up to shady shit these days.
Yeah.
All of these governments are up to nefarious stuff. It's almost better. Like, I don't know if Hillary Clinton had got in, if she would have been a more decent human being.
Yeah.
But we probably wouldn't have known half the shit she was getting up to. So when you've got a tyrant, there's some value in, right, you got something to go out on the streets for. So maybe maybe war or climate change or whatever, maybe these will harness us and bring us together. That's what I mean when I run retreats. They're not easy. I put people into difficult situations because they will squabble, they will tread on each other's toes. I think that argument you're talking about came out of a situation where one guy got really pissed off with the snoring, because
Yeah,
everyone's sleeping in a
exactly.
roundhouse together.
Yeah, yeah,
So I sculpt it in a deliberately, it's going to push people's buttons, but then I try and match that with a culture that is supportive and inquisitive rather than blaming.
that's awesome.
Curiosity will save the planet if you get
Yeah,
curious rather than attacking. So what did you mean by that? And what was going on for me when I responded like that? It takes a lot of discipline to pause the adrenaline, pause the adrenals and the part of us that the fight or flight thing and get curious. So I guess that's
yeah,
that's what happened in that example that you're talking about. Is we managed to stay curious.
yeah, yeah. And how long after, or what was like the timeline of you creating groups and you involving yourself in groups to the retreat? And I'm also curious, like, is there a different intention between the two, and kind of how did you come up with, I don't know if you came up with the idea of of this kind of retreat, or what was your intention going into it?
I don't know if I have intentions really, other than I'm really interested in chaos, which sounds terrible
Yeah,
because there's a lot of injunctions and prejudice against chaos. I mean, I'm not a big fan, even though I run men's groups. I'm not a big fan of we don't sit around talking about gender or what it means to be a man, and I find the questioning of gender quite a healthy thing in terms of what is imprinted on us by society. And I'm really interested in chaos and order, which I mean they're just theoretical
yeah,
terms, just like masculine and feminine are theoretical terms. But if we go with them as the kind of, you could argue, a lot of people have argued they're the kind of the polarizing forces of the universe. This dance between chaos and order. What's interesting to me is somewhere down, probably in the last 10,000 years, we decided that order was masculine and chaos was feminine. And because we live in an essentially misogynistic culture, then chaos became a bad thing, because it's crazy and it's out of control. It's over emotional. And, we don't like that. We like masculine order. And I think both polarities on their own, unchecked, can be really problematic.
absolutely.
If you got too much order, too much rigidity, you have fascism, you have Nazi Germany, you have that kind of very authoritarian, rigid regime. And no one needs me to describe what it's like to have too much chaos. So I think my intention, if I have an intention at all, is to create chaos within order, to try and balance that so that people can break down a bit, people can cut loose a bit, people can become emotional, they can fall apart, but they can be held. And I think, if we're back to ayahuasca, what is a good ayahuasca? What is a safe ayahuasca ceremony? It's a place where the ceremony is the construct that holds the chaos that is the medicine. When you take ayahuasca, you're choosing chaos. You're choosing to let go of control. And when you're around that scene, they're always talking about surrender. So you're surrendering your control mechanisms and you're inviting chaos. And that can get hairy, but if you've got a kind of good structure and a good bunch of people holding it, then that's a good balance. So what am I doing? I'm trying to break away from what I see as an essentially misogynistic, overly structured, overly intellectual, overly ordered world that is in danger of descending into chaos because it's gone too far that way. And I'm trying to dance in the middle somehow.
Yeah. I'm also curious, like, how you came about, because there were a lot of really, you say you have no intention, but like obviously there was some, planning. There's like a, there's a setting. This is happening in nature, and there are certain things that you decide to do. It seemed like 2 days of plant medicine. There was, beating and yelling this pad. So like, there was, some dancing and chanting maybe. And then there was the retreat, which you already kind of discussed was, a lot of Native Americans go as a rite of passage, go into the wilderness with no food or water and basically have to survive out there for several days. Like, maybe tell me a little bit about how you or why you how you came about the different kind of exercises that were portrayed in the film, and maybe what you were trying the environment you were trying to create with those exercises.
Yeah, I guess it's the sum of the last 30 or so years of different things that I found valuable. So there's some value to expressive anger work. And I think, again, you get into gender stuff. So may have noticed in the film, it was primarily the women that struggled with that because there's different social injunctions. As a kid, I was taught not to cry, but
Yeah.
the violence was okay for me. If someone
Mm.
picked on me at school, I was encouraged to be violent by my father. That was cool, but never cry. Whereas women tend to have the opposite. You're allowed to cry. I mean, not too much. Don't go crazy. We don't want you to be
Yeah.
hysterical, but you can cry a bit. But don't get angry. If you get angry, you're a crazy bitch. You know.
Mm.
So the women really struggle with connecting with that part of themselves and feeling legitimate and compelled to be angry. So I think there's really good stuff around gender programming. Um, the time alone in nature that's in every culture. It's partly in Native American culture, but it's also, I mean, it's in the Bible, right? Jesus did it.
Mm.
Most, if not all, religious and spiritual practices will advocate solitude and fasting. It's a way of getting into a kind of meditative state. And for me, it's a useful thing to do, just talking. People can overtalk these experiences, especially plant medicine. You can start telling stories. Oh, well, this is what it meant, and sometimes it's better just to be on your own. And what's the most? I mean, fuck, man. The most radical thing I do is tell people not to use their phones. So when I'm preparing them
Yeah.
for a retreat, it's crazy. You go, right, I want you to come. We're going to bury you. Yeah, okay, cool. And
Yeah.
we're going to give you a bunch of psychedelics. Okay, cool. And we're going to leave you alone without any food or shelter out in the wilderness for days at a time. Okay. And you're not going to be able to have access to your phone for 12 days. You go, no, you're pushing me too far. Like what?
Yeah.
12 days without my
Yeah.
phone,
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a big one for most people, just getting away from technology. And very few people in this day and age in the West will have sat under a tree without their phone or a book or any food for 4 days and just sit in that spot. Don't move. And I'm not doing Native American vision quests because it's not my culture. And I went and trained to do that. And I was like, this isn't cool. I'm a white man. But I don't think it's, so I don't use any of the ritualized, I just do my own thing.
Yeah.
Like I say, recognizing that Christ did it and Buddha did it. And I mean, it's a natural thing for humans to do. You want to get to know yourself, go meet yourself in nature. So they're all things that I've put together in a certain order that are designed to take people deeper and help them meet themselves. And I guess what I'm keen to express, and I always say this when I'm running retreats, is no one's getting cured. This is not to fix you. I don't like that idea. It's problematic in therapy, and I participate in it, but I don't like the idea that you need or certainly my client base, who are essentially, on the whole, normal neurotic human beings. Not
Yeah.
people have their ups and downs. I'm not working in the kind of more, the harder end of mental health. But I don't like the idea that if you're in therapy, it's because you need fixing. That's problematic because it's kind of suggesting there's something wrong with you. and I don't like that. I think there's something really good if you're in therapy. There's something really good if you're doing that self-inquiry. There's something really healthy about exploring yourself and getting to know yourself better and looking at your shadow. That's not a sign of ill health or that something needs fixing. So that's what I mean when I say there's no intention ultimately, to create. There's no goal. Perhaps there's an intention, but
Yeah.
there's no specific goal.
Yeah, I also thought it was interesting that, at least in the film, like you had people who were speaking different languages. So you had English speakers, you had French speakers, and that was really interesting to me. And I guess I'm curious, like, I don't even know what to say. Like, did that contribute, I guess, to the experience in a particular way? Because you have people that are, I speak Mandarin actually. I'm really interested in languages, and I'm just kind of, I think it's very fascinating that you have people that are going through something so intense and profound and are trying to communicate in a language that isn't maybe not their first language.
Mm.
And maybe that's a hindrance, but also because that was my going into it, I was kind of questioning it. I was like, like, I don't know if, maybe maybe it's better for people to articulate themselves more freely in their original language, but at the same time, using another language maybe forces you to kind of think about like the foundation of the language that you're using. And you know, sometimes we have a tendency, maybe what I'm doing right now, you say a bunch of shit, but none of it really means anything. And
Mm.
maybe the translation forces people to be kind of more succinct.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I will often say to people, look, just do it in your own language, especially if it's
Mm.
like loud, expressive anger work or things like that. Sometimes, and you'll have seen a couple of moments perhaps in the film when people were speaking French and we subtitled it
Yeah.
because they needed to express it in their own language. But I've heard time and time again French speaking people say it's actually good for me because I have to really think about my language in exactly the
Yeah.
way you're saying.
Yeah.
I think it's really good. Just mix it up, keep mixing it up. That's there's I can't imagine a scenario where that would not be a good idea because even in a subtle way, I do notice cultural differences in terms of the programming between a French crowd and an English crowd. I mean, my wife's French
Mm.
Vietnamese, and she attracts a lot of French-speaking people to the work that we do, and I attract mostly English-speaking people. There's cultural differences. I love working with the French people. They're very rooted in psychoanalysis still,
Mm.
and I think they're very, very hungry for something different, which I guess we're offering. And English people have been, we're spoiled. We've had access. I mean, French people have got access, but we've been very influenced by American psychological thinking for a long time in a way that it doesn't seem to have spread to France. So that's exciting to me. Their enthusiasm for something new is
Mm.
infectious to me. So, and then that feeds into the whole experience. They work really
Yeah.
hard.
That's awesome. Yeah. It definitely seemed like everybody was really participating. I mean, at different levels, like one of my favorite things about the film was you kind of got to, almost like a play, like you got to meet these characters, these are real people, and you get to see over the course of 12 or 14 days or however many days it was, you get to see, you start with a personality, and you get to see this personality ebb and flow and change and grow and die, and it's not only is it incredibly entertaining, but it's like the dynamicism of it is just so incredible that
Mm.
like that you can see so much, you can see like the spectrum of humanity over the course of 12 days in one person.
Yeah.
uh Very, very fascinating. And I wanted to ask, how you said you've been you know you've always kind of been a creative person, an artist, but how did you get into making these films? And from what I understand, you have two films. So you have Make a Man and then Mayday. I'd love to hear how you what the idea for starting these films was and how you got into it.
I mean, I was when I went to art school when I was young, I really wanted to get into film, but there was no real. I don't know. I just wasn't. There's a lot of reasons why that didn't really work out. I worked I ended up working on commercials and music videos in my 20s, but it wasn't what I was really. I was really interested in real film. Then I became a therapist, and like I say, it's one of the satisfying things of getting to this point of my life, of returning to that. And that was just one of those beautiful, lucky moments in life where I met this French woman. We ended up getting married, and at the time that we met, she had been making a lot of small portraits, like 10-minute. In fact, that's how we met. She came to the UK to film me. So she'd been making those portraits, and she was just in the process of finishing her first feature-length film. And I helped her a little bit to finish that and gave her some feedback. And we're just very good collaborators artistically.
Yeah.
And also, I think there was a bit of my own ego in there. So I saw her release the film, and I saw the attention she was getting, and part of me was like, well, I want some of that. And I was sitting exactly where I'm sitting now as I'm speaking to you, running a group one night, and most of my client base, or a lot of my clients, work in the arts or media or whatever in some shape or form. And I remember looking around the room and going, oh wow, we're a film company. Because I've been approached a lot over the years by film companies who wanted to film what I do, and I've always said no, because you bring a film crew in and you're not going to get what we do because you've broken the spell somehow. But it was just one of those moments where I looked around and I was like, oh shit, you're a cameraman and you're a lighting guy and you're a producer. We could do this ourselves. And then you don't break the integrity. So it was a very spontaneous, who's around on Saturday? And we got together and we filmed a bunch of interviews with these guys. And I literally that morning, I just made a list of questions. Tell me about your mom, tell me about your dad, what does it mean to be a man, that kind of stuff that we don't even get into in the groups normally. And I knew I didn't want to film the group. And I thought, well, I'll film some interviews and I'll chuck it on YouTube. Maybe it'll encourage men to talk about themselves a bit more. And then the footage was really good. And I realized, I don't know, it was just a part of me that realized if I make this film on my own, it's going to be defensive. It's going to be, not all men are bad, kind of. It's going to come from that place. I really need to balance this with a woman's perspective. And my wife's, I'm sure she would define herself as a feminist. So I was like, well, that's the way to go. We need to collaborate on this. So I asked her. She was reluctant at first, but she kind of got seduced by the footage that we had. And so we made Make Me a Man 4 or 5 years ago now, I guess. We actually came to New York. That was where we premiered it in Madison Square. So yeah, we did that together, and it's like everything in my life. I feel like I just stumbled into it, but following my passion, I suppose.
Are you working on
this film? We were commissioned. We were approached to commission.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we were lucky. They were like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. Here's some money. Do you want to make a film? And so we did that. And maybe that's the last film we'll ever make. I don't know. There's no plan as such. It's whatever emerges.
Yeah, I'm going to share it with a bunch of people. I finished it watching it this morning, and I've never seen anything, a film like that. Like, I feel like, hey, people barely talk about their emotions in, everyday life period. So like making a film of it is very rare. So it's in its own category, and I'm definitely going to share it with people. I'm not sure who's, how much was your wife and how much was you, but like, my hat's off to both of you. Like, not only is it, it's beautiful. It's the storyline is, it's over the 12 days. It's like very, very like structured, and kind of, there's like a little bit of like an art. There's an arc, but also it's just, it's great. You guys captured a lot of really awesome stuff, and there's a lot covered in like an hour and a half, and
Mm.
it's it's just different to see something like that where there's so much, there's so much conversation and there's so much experience of emotion. Like
Mm.
um, I found myself, tearing up at certain parts for sure. But it's, it connects you to your humanity. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing it with me, and I
Mm.
know a bunch of people that would find it really, valuable.
Yeah, I
Are,
hope
are
so.
you are you working on anything? Are there any ideas in your head going forward about films or books? I know you've written a bunch of books as well. Any kind of works you're in the
Yeah,
drafting stages of?
I think we'll actually go back to doing short films. Unless someone comes along. I mean, the problem is, I was talking to my wife, my the other week, and saying, well, the problem is, if someone wants us to make a film, this is the only way we can work. They have to come to us, and we're going to have to say, well, we need like 500,000 production costs at least, and we can't tell you when we'll deliver. We can't tell you what it'll be about. Now, anyone who's crazy enough to do that, fine. But
Yeah,
that isn't really how Netflix works. They want a
yeah,
deadline, they want to know what it's about, and it's for us. It's an exploration. I mean, even that's the only way I can work. We've done that throughout the films. Like, okay, you guys are crazy enough to fund this film. Let's go and. I mean, we didn't know if it was going to work. You talked about that conflict. I watched that with horror, not because of the conflict, but I look at it and I go, what would have happened if this hadn't kicked off? Would we have had a film? Because there's such so much drama in that,
yeah,
and to walk into a scenario with a cameraman, a couple of camera people, and a sound guy, and all these people, and go, well, who knows what's going to happen over the next 12 days? That's you got to have a degree of confidence. And so the way I've always approached it is, film's going to tell us. We have to accept that. And
yeah,
about, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, we actually gave up. Uh, Mai said to me, "Look, I don't think I could make this film." And I was like, "Yeah, I think you're right. It's just not going to work." And we came to that point, and then the film kind of went, "No, I'm not done with you." And it kind of showed. I sound like a hippie now, which is fine by me, but
yeah,
uh, it kind of showed us where it wanted to go. And I think there's something about, back to chaos and order. You want to have a loose touch with the reins. You got to have your hands on the reins, but you also have to have enough humility to accept that this is not, you say, was it me or was it it was mostly her. um Although I've obviously had my input, but again, in the end, it's the film that needs to be made. I like Rick Rubin a lot. I don't know if you've listened to his stuff, but he
yeah,
talks about that, and it's an old artistic cliche, but letting something come through you. And I was talking about this with someone. I was using this as an example this morning. So the title of this new film is Mayday, and it's a good example of when you try to be creative. If you try really hard to be creative, it usually, for me anyway, it doesn't work. There's something in that effort that creates a tightness that inhibits the kind of flow of that creative thing. And so I knew I wanted a good title for the film. I knew it was really important, and I kept trying, and I kept thinking, and I kept trying different things, and I felt really stuck. And then she lives in Paris, I live in London. She sent me, and we were apart at this time, she sent me a cut of the film that she'd been working on to review and look at. And the minute I switched it on, she'd put a caption on since the last time I'd seen it at the beginning, which said, May the 1st, 2022. I was like, oh, it's called Mayday. I didn't know that. And I got on the phone, I was like, it's called Mayday. It just showed me. And because we started it on the 1st of May, and May Day is that kind of, it's Beltane. It's got all that kind of, pagan, ceremonial, ritualistic stuff to it. And then I mentioned it, and also, it's a cry for help, so that worked. I liked that. And then I mentioned it to someone else, and I didn't know this, and Mai didn't know this, but they were like, "Well, do you know where the origins of the call sign Mayday?" And I was like, "No, I just thought it was Mayday. I never thought about it." And they were like, "Well, it's French. It's
Huh.
Mayday, M apostrophe A day." I'm like,
Hmm.
oh fuck! Well, that's good because half the group is French. It was a French production.
Nice.
She's French.
Hmm.
So the film told us, the
Yeah.
film told us what it was. I didn't think that's not my idea. So I think that's that's what I love about the creative process. And it might be in the film. There's so many hours of footage that have been in and out. I think there was definitely a bit where I was interviewed where I was saying, look, if I knew what was going to happen, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's that intrigue and that mystery. I remember
Hmm.
Stephen King talking about his writing process and saying he never knows what the end of his books are going to be, and that's what motivates him to write. Is he wants to find out what's going to happen at the end of The Shining or something.
Yeah.
Um, so that's how I like to work, and I think next, unless someone's crazy enough to want us to make a feature-length film, and we're crazy enough to, it's been 2.5 years of of pain. Um, I think we'll go back to making. I might do it. I think we're talking about doing a Substack together or using some kind of platform like
Oh,
that.
awesome.
Doing
That's awesome.
a monthly podcast together, and maybe doing a monthly, like, 10-minute interview or film with someone like that. But creating
Yeah,
smaller
that's cool.
bite-sized bits of
Yeah.
regular content rather than disappearing for 2 or 3 years and then coming
Yeah.
back. I love it. I
Yeah.
love that process. But yeah, it's not something. I'm not Scorsese. I'm not about to go out and demand it. So if it comes to us, fine.
Fair. You also, I mean, you had a podcast for a little bit. Why did you stop the podcast? Out of curiosity.
Uh, uh, to be honest, I felt like a bit of a cliche because everyone I
Mm.
spoke to and everyone I heard about had a podcast suddenly. And it just made me, oh God.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I'd also achieved what I wanted to do, which was I wanted to learn how to do a podcast because I think it's, what you're doing right now is an art. It's an art form. It's really difficult, and it's very easy to listen to a podcast and never consider for one moment the artistry that is involved in not just holding the conversation, but steering it, keeping it interesting, choosing, curating the people you have on. And at the beginning of the year, I said, I'm going to do 28 episodes. And I did that and paused. It's not over, but
Yeah.
that bit was completed. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. And the film was coming up, and I'm a one trick person. I can't really multitask. I mean, I've got my practice, which is super busy. I've got space for one other thing, so I can write a book, or I can make a film, or I can do a podcast. I can't do them all at the same time. I don't have the bandwidth. So also
Yeah.
the film was happening, so that made sense to pause that. And now that the film is kind of completed, more or less, apart from selling it, which is another whole thing, getting it out to the world. But apart from that, I guess, yeah, we're looking at launching something, Substack or something like that, in the autumn.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the world, in my opinion, the world needs to see it. So best of luck on the business journey. I mean, I know it's like not certain personality types don't find it fun, but like, it's necessary, and I'm
Tricky
excited
one, man. Tricky one.
more
Someone
people.
said to me recently, "Oh,
Mm.
who do you think Netflix will be interested?" I was like, "Well, I hope not. If they are, we've got something really wrong." That's the problem with being a bit cult or a bit underground is,
Yeah.
Disney Plus aren't probably going to want it on their platform, but that's cool. People, if one person watches a film and it changes the way they think, it's kind
Yeah.
of served its purpose.
For
And
sure.
again, I was listening to Rick Rubin. I felt really relieved because I felt like such a fucking narcissist, which I think you have to be an artist of any kind. But he was saying on a podcast I was listening to, he's like, well, I do this for me.
Yeah.
I'm not really too hung up on the audience. And I think the minute you start sculpting something because the audience might like this or might that. He was very clear. He said, well, that's commerce. Art is
Yeah.
when you do something for yourself, and if other people enjoy it, then great. So
Yeah.
I've not made this film in the hope that Netflix or Amazon Prime will buy it. I've made it because I wanted to make it.
Hell yeah.
No.
Yeah. That's awesome. I wanted to ask you one thing about the film that I mean, I was just curious, like, where did you, like, in the beginning of the film, people are digging their own graves and they're like laying in them. And I'm, obviously there's a connection to death, and there's power in exploring your own mortality. But I was kind of just curious, how you, that was an interesting exercise. And I was curious how you kind of came about that. And, you know, what, what,
Yeah,
what,
I
what
was.
was the actual exercise? Yeah.
I did it as a participant on a retreat once, and I mean, there's a lot of different versions of that. Some people go full burial with a breathing tube, which just scares the shit out of it. Although I was
Whoa.
disappointed when I did it, I was disappointed that wasn't what we were doing. I was kind of up for that challenge, but I wasn't going to do that I'd do that as a participant. I wouldn't do that as the person responsible. That's
Yeah.
too scary for me somehow. So if I had 12 people buried with breathing tubes, that would freak me out. It's like, how do you know that everyone's still alive?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But the symbolism, I mean, you ask, I don't know if I'll ever write another book. If it comes to me and tells me it needs to be written, I guess I will. But I do have an idea that I would like to write a book about death. I'm just a little bit superstitious. That feels like a finale, and I'm not ready for that. But
Hmm.
I'm very fascinated by death, not in a morbid way, but I mentioned I was in India when I was in my 20s. That's where I picked up on Gurdjieff, and I think, I mean, it's easy to mythologize your life, or almost turn it into a movie. Perhaps we all do that to some degree, but there was a very cinematic moment in my life. It's very kind of Jim Morrison, where I witnessed a really, really awful road accident where a bunch of children were killed, and I'd never seen a dead person before, and they'd just been killed. They're like 5 or 6 children, you know, dead in the road, and it was a very foggy day in northern India, and I saw a couple more fatal crashes over the course of a bus journey that I was on, and it just kind of woke me up to my own mortality. Really, it's the first time I was really consciously. I'm not religious. I was kind of praying, going, if I get off this bus, I'll do something different with my life. I just didn't know if I was going to make it, and I kept going, oh, you're just being neurotic. And then I'd see another fucking dead person. It's like, no, I'm not being neurotic. This is happening. This is really happening. So it really, I guess I just went into shock. But that was the beginning of sounds like a cliche. Well, I quite like cliches. It was an awakening. It snapped me out of my kind of Western white man's immortality, and humbled me and made me realize this was going to end one day, even if I live a long, to be an old man, which I have. It was going to end. And then I started to look at our relationship to death in the West, which is awful. It's really sanitized. I think we live in a state of denial, and we're totally unprepared for bereavement, and we're totally unprepared for our own death. And I read somewhere that someone reckoned, and this makes sense to me, that happiness is relative to our awareness of our own mortality. So I think that's an interesting thing in terms of our cultural neuroses. You're going to die, you're going to live more, you know. And then again, spending time in India and Nepal and places like that, and seeing death much more open. I remember I was running a retreat once, and we were up on a hill in Nepal, and the local guy who was looking after our camp came up to me, and there was about 200 people behind him, and I was like, "What's with the crowd?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, but one of the guys down in the village died last night. Do you mind if we cremate him? This is the place we use for our cremation." I was like, "Well, it's your hill, man. You do what you want." And so they brought this person up and cremated them. And again, I think it's important. We sanitize death. You don't see that. I was in Nepal last year, and my daughter was with me, my eldest daughter, and I took her after the retreat. I took her to the cremation ground. She's 21, 20 then, I guess. I took her to the cremation grounds. I wanted her to, not out of some kind of, touristy thing. It's like, look, this is real. This is part of life. And I think the sanitization and the distance contributes to a kind of cultural depression in the West. You gotta fucking rinse it. It doesn't last very long. Get out there and enjoy it and take some risks and make some mistakes, because it's finite and it goes a lot quicker than you thought it was going to. And the denial of death, and the fact that we don't see death, that it's, occasionally you might have an open casket or something, but generally someone dies, maybe you see the dead body, but even then they put makeup on it and make it look good. And, for most people, a lot of people can go through life and never see a dead body. So how do you live if you don't really appreciate you're going to die? So I'm really interested in this.
In that exercise where people are digging their own graves, I mean, was there like a conversation that was had, or was it literally just, we're digging our graves and we're sleeping in them, and like, you can think about what you want to think about? Or was there like some additional kind of conversation or exercise that went along
There's
with
a
it?
little bit. Mostly it's see what happens, see what comes up. But this is a rehearsal,
Yeah.
because this is the only thing that's guaranteed. You are going here, right?
Mm.
This is not a therapeutic exercise. This is not some new age thing on a retreat. This is a premonition of the only thing I can promise you is you're going in the ground. And so go try it out, try it on, see how it feels, see what comes up when you confront that reality in a way that perhaps you haven't ever before. I mean, it was a fairly young group, I guess.
Yeah.
Some people in their 20s and 30s on the whole, a cross section, but there weren't too many people. I think, there wasn't anyone of my age. So that was the main instruction. And I think I said to them, what I was told when I did it as a participant, which is get in and review your entire life. Just scan through your whole life and see what happens. It's always about curiosity. It's always let's create this experience and see what happens, and then we can talk about it. Most people didn't like it.
Yeah.
What's not to
Yeah.
love?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Was
it's a
it?
good preparation for the medicine, which came afterwards. Go face
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Was there, kind of wrapping up, like, was there, I mean, I'm sure all of these exercises and all of these things they all served a purpose, and, everybody can extract meaning and create inflection for each of them. But was there a certain exercise, or maybe was it just a certain period of time in this retreat where you saw people to really kind of get out of their own shell, and where some of the breakthroughs were happening? Or was it scattered all over the place? Was it near the end? I'm kind of just curious, like, when
I think
when did, because
that
it felt like a
conflict.
paradigm shift. Yeah. A
Yeah,
paradigm
that
shift
conflict.
happened. Yeah. Yeah.
That helped, but
Yeah.
the burial was day one.
Yeah.
Yeah, they arrived late one night, and the next morning they were digging their graves. So I always throw people in fairly quick. But, it's not that difficult. You sit people around a fire, like I say, there's
Yeah.
a kind of remembering that happens, and also it's my job's fairly easy, because anyone who's of the kind of personality to choose to do that. I mean, whenever I do something like that, I go, what is wrong with me? Why am I not sitting on a beach like everyone else? Why do I
Yeah.
choose to do these things? But that's the beautiful thing as a practitioner, is whenever 20 or 30 or however many people choose to do that, you've already got a commonality in that everyone decided that's what I want to do. So they got
Yeah.
something in common.
Yeah.
So it's not difficult to harness that and steer that and, manipulate it in a positive way.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that I really liked was you know, and you mentioned it in the film, like there is this kind of theatrical
Mm,
like element to it, and I think that's awesome. Like I mean, there's like costumes and there's music, and you're forcing people to kind of exist, you know, still in the real world because you're surrounded by people who you're surrounded by relationships and people, but like there is this. It's not like mysticism, but there is like this theatrical component where you're also inviting people to exist in a different way,
mm,
and like and that created a lot of openness, and I thought it was really cool to see, and it seemed like everybody was pretty receptive to that, at least by the end. At least that's the way the film portrayed it. But yeah, just no question there. Honestly, it was just it was cool to see, like you guys definitely created this kind of world that
mm,
people existed in and allowed them to, you know, there was like an imaginative kind of, maybe it was partially imaginative, but it was theatrical, and it allowed people to kind of explore freely, which I thought was really awesome, as opposed to just sitting around in a circle and drinking your coffee and going back to your home. Like you're here, you're in this new world, we're going to do some different things, like this is the plan. Yeah, it was awesome, it was fucking
mm,
cool.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's, you go to a costume party or a masked ball or something,
Yeah.
it gives you access to other parts of yourself. That's,
Yeah.
it's back to that multiple personality thing. And I'm always curious. Did you ever read a book called The Dice Man?
No. To
It's
write
a
it
bit of
down.
a cult book. It
Okay.
came out in the late 60s, early 70s. It was by a guy called Luke Reinhardt that I corresponded with. He was a really nice guy. He was really available, and he was very good to me. And I wrote to him. He died a couple of years ago now. But it was a big book, and I read it when I was in my teens, and it was just a cool page-turning novel. And then I reread it in my 50s. I was like, oh no, this is not a page-turning novel. Well, it is, but this is a very spiritual book. And
Mm.
I kind of developed a bit of a pen friendship with him. And it's the same thing. It's the same idea of multiple personalities. And the premise of the book is New York therapist, very successful, very respected, established, apartment overlooking Central Park, published, blah, blah, blah. I've been playing poker or something, and everyone's gone home, and he's a bit drunk, and there's a dice, some dice on the table, and he goes, well, if I throw a 5, I'm going to go downstairs and rape my neighbor. And he throws a 5, and he goes and rapes her, and she likes it. So it's it's okay. But I mean, it's a story of absolute chaos where he then
Mm.
dismantles his life on the roll of a die, and
Whoa.
every decision that he makes with his career, with his family, with his life, with his personality is based on the roll of a die. But the whole thing, like I say, it sounds like a kind of crazy page-turning novel, but actually the whole thing is very deep because it's the recognition there's a lot of us in here. And the minute you hear someone or hear yourself go, oh, I'm not that kind of person. The premise of the novel is, well, when you decide you're not that kind of person, go and be that kind of person and see what it feels like. I'm not a rapist. I'm not advocating rape, clearly, and
Yeah.
it's a fiction, but I guess it's an extreme example of. Actually, to be honest, in Make Me a Man, I explore that. I talk about that, the importance of, rather than, we're back to shadow work, the importance of, rather than going, I'm not a murderer or I'm not a
Yeah.
rapist, I'm one of the good guys.
Yeah.
I think that's really dangerous.
I agree.
Go to the part of you that is really not. Go to the part of you just as a fantasy. Don't act it
Mhm.
out,
Yeah.
but imagine yourself. It's those great moral questions where people go, "Oh, what would you have done if you were a concentration camp in Nazi Germany?" I don't know. It's a fucking horrible question. I'd have probably joined in.
Mm.
Probably, en masse when everyone's doing it, and you go into a kind of state of collective madness. Am I going to say, "No, I'm the good guy"? I would have objected. But really, if someone's going to kill my wife and my kids, if I go up, I don't know. These are really
Yeah.
difficult moral questions that I think are really useful, really important to explore if you want to get to know yourself. So The Dice Man is a really good example of that. I have no idea how I got onto this particular rant. What was the question?
That's good. I like
Way
where it
back,
ended.
way back. You'll have to
I
rerun
forget the question I asked it, but no, it's all good. Maybe the to wrap things up, maybe on a more playful note. I
On a
like
more
all your
positive note than
well,
concentration.
no, I mean I love talking about the things that you just mentioned. I didn't mean to try to avert it. I think I 100% agree, and I think especially at this period of time in history, I think people need to reflect um, on the darkness that's inside of them, and I definitely do that as well. But I also I see that you have a lot of cool tattoos, and I was admiring them, and I'm kind of just curious, like when did I don't know, like I got a tattoo last summer, raised in a family that has no tattoos. That's
Mhm.
not but I did it. For me, there was like a meaning behind it, and I understand that some people have, they're just like, fuck it, I like it, it looks cool, I'm just gonna get this on my back, I'm gonna get this on my chest. Some people say, you know what, this means I'm at a place and I'm gonna get this tattoo, or this picture has, or this quote has a certain meaning to me. What is your relationship to your tattoos? Because I think my view of tattoos, and this is a new view. I used to say fuck no, but now I'm like, A, like what are we saving ourselves for? And B, I think that like we should you know life is should be celebrated, and like why not put art on our bodies to celebrate
Mm, mm.
ideas and beautiful things, or scary things. But I'm just curious what your relationship to your tattoos is, and maybe tell me about the last tattoo that you got.
I mean, my my tattoos are an extension of a post-it note. Like, some
Mm,
people will put a post-it note on the fridge to remind themselves. I think if you're going to really commit to change, or, working on a part of yourself, then the best way to do it is self-mutilation.
mm,
Because it hurts and it drives it into your flesh. And,
yeah.
I've got a little one here that is a reminder of my shadow side, and it's
Mm,
there in the mirror every time I look at myself. So it's there as a reminder. I've got, yeah, I mean, all over my arms, but every single one is that one is it's the all-seeing eye. That's because I cheated on my first wife and
mm,
realized I didn't have anywhere near the integrity that I thought I had. So like, well, I've got to put, the all-seeing eye to me is you don't get away with shit. I mean, I'm not religious, but
yeah.
that idea that God sees everything, you don't get away with anything in the end because you know what you've done. And so it was there to remind me to have more integrity. And on the whole, the last one I got, I don't know, what was the last one I got? I think it was, yeah, it was the dice.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Yeah, the dice. And before that, I think I got the hourglass, which is back to what we were talking about. Time, man. Time's running out.
Mm.
Don't take it for granted.
And do you find that you actually, because if it's on your body, you probably, there's probably part of you that becomes normalized. And, it's like the shoes that, you buy a pair of shoes and you love the shoes when you wear them, and then after 3 months, you kind of ignore them. Do you find yourself kind of, ignoring them, or do you actually do they act as pretty good reminders?
Yeah, they're pretty good reminders. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm fortunate in that, training to the best therapy in the world really is training to be a therapist. And so I
Mm,
trained for years, and through that process, you have to go very deep. You have to work through a lot of your own issues. And so one of the benefits of that was I really learned the art of self-inquiry. I really learned how to work on myself. So, for example, when we made Mayday, I knew I was going to put a bunch of people through a big ordeal and a big challenge. And I thought that the fairest way, and probably the most kind of ethical is the word, but the most creative way, was to put myself through something. So I did some family constellation work. I went back and I took some plant medicine, which I hadn't done for years. And I threw myself quite deeply into an inquiry about my relationship with other human beings, which was quite separate. I can be quite an isolate. I live in a different country to my wife. I live in a different town from my children. All my human contact is done by the hour, because I'm a therapist. So it's
Yeah.
very controlled. And so I just decided, right, I'm going to do I thought it would be a few months, and I think it's now beginning to conclude, but that's, it's run the same amount of time that the film has. So 2.5 years later, I feel much more able to be with people than I was in the beginning. But I'm quite good at taking a theme and working with it, and a tattoo is just one tool with that. But change doesn't happen unless you really work hard,
Yeah.
with focus and effort. I was
Yeah.
the same as a lot of people. When I first went to therapy, I thought it was going to be done to me. Therapist doesn't do anything. You do the work as the client, as the participant, and a good therapist will be a companion in that work, but you do it yourself.
Yeah. On that note, I mean, I think that's I have one last question to do with that, and I'm curious, like, how you think people can become more actualized, authentic versions of themselves, whether that's through therapy or whether that's through their relationships. But like, I'd love to, as a therapist, I'd love to hear your thoughts about, um, how people can create a better relationship with themselves and stop the repression of their different identities and become, you know, hopefully more, create a more authentic relationship and create a, you know, um, become more authentic versions of themselves. Like, what is that process like? How can people start that process? And
Well, I think
love to
we
hear your
covered
thoughts.
it really, because it's shadow
Yeah.
work, right? Shadow work is when you deny different parts of yourself, whether they're ones that you consider good or bad, then you enter into a place of inauthenticity. What does authenticity even mean? It means being open to all that you are. There was a journalist, he died recently, Australian journalist called John Pilger, and I remember him saying, "Have you ever thought maybe we're not the good guys?" And I thought that's
Mm.
a fucking great question, because as we were
Wow.
talking about 10 minutes ago, something, everyone thinks they're the good guys, right? I mean, the Germans had "God is with us" on their belt buckles, and they didn't think they were doing something wrong. No one goes and invades another country, unless you're a mercenary or something. It's not something that we do to go, shit, I'm with the bad guys. It's very rare. I like that in Apocalypse Now, which was always one of my favorite films, because that kind of really explored that. And at the end, you're not left with a conclusion. It's pretty blurry, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to do that kind of inquiry into who's inside you, that's to me what we mean by authenticity. It's being as much of yourself as possible without any real need to get to a conclusion, because you're probably not going to get there. But it's that openness. And the minute you go, I'm not that kind of person, you just shut down that part of that possibility even.
Yeah. Well said. Awesome. Well, I think that's it for me. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, I'm rinsed. I've got
Awesome,
to
man.
go.
Well,
I've got to go and run a group now, so I've got to save some for the guys.
okay. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Jerry, I really appreciate the time, man. Thank you for answering my email, and it's been awesome talking to you.